My last video was on the hyper mid-drive mountain and e-bike that even most e-bike haters seem to have some interest in, and for good reason in my opinion. Today, I got it partially stripped down. I'm already starting to do some KevCentral here, at least in the planning phases, for some KevCentral changes to this bike. Today's video, we're going to look at that and we're going to look at this. This is the technical drawings, the official technical drawings for the hyper mid-drive mountain. They contain all the geometry and specs that I usually measure myself. So we're going to go over those. I'm going to show you the geometry and specs, including a couple of things that are a little different. At least one thing that's different on this drawing here, and something else that I've noticed. Then I have a slew of questions here, some of which I answered in the review video, but I'm going to try to cover anything that I didn't. I scanned through all these. We'll cover those, but first let's get to the geometry and specs. Let's get started with this technical drawing. I know a little tough to see, but trust me, it's better here than it is if I just edit it into the screen. It's such a low resolution. But the good thing about this, no need for me to whip out my handy dandy Alabama engineered reach and stack meter, because it's all in this technical drawing, everything that I need to know. This might be a good point for me to mention that if you have not watched that review video, you might want to pause here, watch that, and then come back, because in that review video it did mention some stuff. Like this head tube angle, 66 degrees, very slack for a bike from Walmart, e-bike or not. I'm going to go back to this technical drawing because right here is some good information. This gives me the size of the head tube headset cups. They're 44 millimeter, both top and bottom, so that kind of rules out taper, but 44 at least we know. I can see the size of that head tube. That's 120 millimeters, and here's a measurement that I don't normally give. Slight audio hiccup, so I'm having to edit this in, but the measurement you're about to hear is the length of the fork from the crown to the bottom. To the bottom of the fork, that is 515 millimeters. This even shows the fork rake, that's 46. Two things this did not give is the length of the top tube and the down tube. I measured this, and that's 595 millimeters. This was 735 to the center down here. Now interestingly, I didn't get measurements for these two, though I do see the dotted lines. I guess they just didn't put them on. They did remove some information from this, some, I guess, proprietary information for Hyper. Could be that that got scrubbed out, maybe in some comments that they had, because I see that I do have chainstay length here. The chainstay is 485 millimeters from the center of the bottom bracket to the center of the rear dropout. We also already know from my review video that this is a 17-inch frame. That's noted here in millimeters, 432 millimeters. Here's something that I haven't covered in a lot of my geo and specs video. Bottom bracket drop. According to this technical drawing, it's 40 millimeters. Okay, now let's go with the reach and stack. People ask about that a lot, and I'm seeing 459.4 for the reach, and the stack is 604.1. I'm having to angle this so that I can read it. Maybe you can, but there's the measurements for reach and stack. Now, there's some other good nuggets of information here. Now, this shock, I see here that they measured from the pivot at its most downward point to the lower mount hole, and they got 130 millimeters. Now that's not the actual travel, that's with it all the way down. And this is where it gets interesting, because some companies will use that measurement to say this has 130 millimeters of suspension travel. Actual suspension travel is measured back here. There are two things about this technical drawing that don't reflect accurately based on what I get when I measure on this bike. For instance, that suspension travel at 77 millimeters, when I measured it, I can move this 85 millimeters. So I don't know if that's just variation in manufacturing or what, but when I measure it, I try the same thing. Just max travel, I do get the 130, but back here for some reason, I get, or 85, almost said 75. I get 85 and they say 77. So I don't know about that. That's not really that important to me. The more important part is right here. And this is the rear spacing, because you know, if you watch my review video, that this bike is unique in that it has boost up front. Put a question mark or an asterisk right there. It has boost up front. Back here though, it had a bolt-on rear wheel That's easy enough for me to fix because, as you'll see when I upgrade it, I convert the wheel set anyway. But you do need to know the rear spacing. And something interesting happened when I compared this technical drawing that shows 135 for the rear spacing with when I actually calipered this, and I got 141.7, which is in effect 142 millimeters, which will be more popular and more welcome to most viewers, but curious that their original drawings here show it at 135. So that's just bizarre. And there it is again. Can you see that? 135. I don't know why that is, but also there's something else interesting when we look up front at this fork. Okay, what I'm about to say is probably going to spur some comments, but stick with me here and tell me, am I wrong? This clearly says boost, does it not? I mean, B-O-O-S-T, I read that in English as boost. And we know that this fork has the through axle. If I turn this up, you can make out it's upside down. So let me just pull this out for you and turn it around and show you that this says 15 AH2-100. When I get my calipers out and I put them on this, I get basically 15 millimeters, so that part's good. But I see that 100. Oh, let me take the same calipers and I'm gonna measure inside these dropouts, and I'm gonna get 100. Now when I see boost, I think a different measurement than 15 by 100. Are there multiple definitions for boost? I don't see any adapters here. Now I have seen people have a boost fork and adapt it for the 100 millimeter, but this is just a straight up fork with a straight up axle in there. So I'm curious, am I wrong, or is that, I don't know, a question mark there? Comment below with that, but I did want to mention it because it's something that I noticed. Again, maybe I'm just not informed enough. So let me know what you think. Share your knowledge with me, please. That covers all of the technical drawing here and all the geometry and specs. With what I mentioned in the main video, I tried not to duplicate too much. But with everything that I measured and what's on here, we now know pretty much all the geometry and specs. If there's anything else about geometry and specs that I didn't mention, feel free to comment with it. Speaking of comments, I do have questions. These are questions that I was asked that I didn't feel I answered. I filtered through them all. I'm going to start out with Kentry Heart. He asks if this has regenerative braking. You might not know what that is. On some e-bikes, when you quit pedaling, the wheels rotating, sometimes using the brakes, can regenerate power and put it back into the battery. This is a base torque sensing mid-drive. It does not have anything that regenerates any power to put it back in the battery simply from coasting or braking. So Kentry Heart, nope, no regenerative braking. I don't think you're going to see that on any e-mountain bike, which is what I classify this. The Captain's Cog, I have all the questions. I just thought I'd put that in there because I thought it was funny. Trousdale Mini, by close glance, the welds don't look too deep. Please review on the welds. Next question. Trousdale Mini, I don't know how I would review welds, so I'm just going to move on. But thank you for asking. Maybe somebody can just look at them and somehow figure out something and let me know. Dave Gravitt, no bearings on the suspension, worrying. Yeah, there's no bearings. There are bushings though, metal bushings in here. So I don't have much worry about this for my use, but yeah, I would have liked to have seen bearings. But at this price, people, I mean, you're getting a torque sensing mid-drive that is spot on. 36 volts, 250 watts. Not concerning to me with the torque-based mid-drive. We'll talk about power in just a second. I don't mark against this bike for no bearings. I would have liked to have seen them, I will admit. But the way it's set up with the metal bushings, I don't have any worries with it as far as how I'll be riding this bike. I think for what it is, for its price, it's satisfactory. Though, yeah, would have liked to have seen bearings. Jeremy Taylor asks, does the battery really only last for an hour? I asked a couple things here, a couple extra things. This 36 volt battery wasn't it 367 watt hours that this is? I rate this on how many miles I can go on the trail. And in my review, I mentioned I'd ridden it a few times at 10 miles. And I've pushed this up pretty close to 15, which takes longer than an hour riding up and down hills and stuff on the trail. And it goes fine for that. So if you want to do hours, yeah, it lasts longer than an hour. But you're going to get about 15 miles per charge at max pedal assist. That's kind of bouncing between 3 and 5, spending most of the time in 5. If, of course, lowered it down to 1, you would get significantly more. How is the gearing? Really not all that important. I counted this, and I counted 38 tooth here for this front chain ring. And the back, I don't have a wheel on this, but the back is Mega Drive. So those two pair for a usable gearing with the torque. You're not going to have anything you really can't climb up, at least in my experience. So far, I haven't encountered anything that I couldn't climb up. What it will limit is your top speed a bit. Of course, pedal assisted, it limits at 20 miles per hour. It's 20.3 in my experience with this bike. I tried getting it on flat ground out on the street. I just saw what it would max out at a usable top speed cadence. And I came up with about 26 miles per hour. So that's really the max top speed that I would rate this bike at. But I'm going to say 20 miles per hour because that's the assisted top speed, which is what most people are going to use. Does the geometry feel modern? Oh, yeah. Yeah, all the specs that I just showed you, all that does feel definitely modern. My biggest concern is the rear end. Is there much flex in the frame when cornering or climbing? Is this shock itself any good? I'll talk about the shock first. This isn't, I'll go up a little bit. This is an Exiform shock. You know, I don't rate Exiform as anything high end, but it is usable. I haven't blown it out yet. I did have one user comment and say that they blew theirs out within the first month, but it is Exiform. It's a known brand. It's made by Kind Shock. They're decent little shocks. I like that it's an air shock, so it's tunable. As far as flex, out of any of these pivots, I haven't had any problem so far with any more than any other full suspension bike flexing. You're going to get a little just because there are bolts and bushings and all that stuff. But no, I haven't had any problems so far, but that's going to be an ongoing thing that I keep an eye on. So thank you for asking because it's a good question. Oh, also, something else here. Also, I'm curious to know how the electronics work. Is there more to that? Oh, yeah, there is. Specifically, can you feel any delays between pushing the pedals, the extra power of the motor, and if you could go over the power modes, how they feel when riding? Okay. All right. This is, I mentioned in my video, very, very good with the on-off. I mean, lower the camera back a little bit there. I mean, as good as some of the Shimano systems that I've seen. It's practically instant. I mentioned in my video that it felt like it kind of could sense my brain impulses to my leg and would turn on and off just almost instantly with when I quit pedaling. The only time that I've had any unexpected burst was I hit a root and I forced myself down on this with this foot and my left foot went on the ground and there was just that little second of extra burst, but that's because I was tenuously balanced here with half my weight here and the other half down on the ground, and it was sensing torque there, so it tried to give me a little boost. That was the only unexpected boost event that I have experienced with this bike. So I hope that answers your question. Now let's go to raising 3 boys. Is the rear end 12 by 148? How many Newton meters of torque? That's an important. That's actually why I pulled this comment out, because we just talked about that. And I mentioned the weight in my video. It's 55.2 pounds. Okay, I'm going to get you here because I suspect that in my video you saw this and you thought that 40 Newton meters of max might be the output of this motor. I think that right there is not the rating of the motor, but it's this lock ring right here that's holding this on. Because everything that I've seen, this is a Vinca drive system or made by Vinca for Hyper, and all their other motors that I've seen are 80 Newton meters. So I'd find it odd that they had to manufacture something entirely new to half their output for Hyper. And this doesn't feel like 40 Newton meters. This feels, I know what 60 feels like. I know what 65 feels like. And 80, I know what 80 feels like. This feels right around the 80 ballpark to me. So that's what I'm going to say. And if you know anything different, let me know. And also, if you two agree that this is the lock ring 40 Newton meters and not the actual motor torque. So I hope that answers your question. I mean, the power feels awesome. It comes on and off exactly as I want it to. So let's speed it up a bit here. You're in top speed uphill, top speed on flat road. I think I just answered that earlier when I was talking about speeds on somebody else's question. So you can go back and listen to that. Harry Grimley, what are the colors? Get your choice of any color you want as long as it is this pewterish gray. Andrew Singleton, how easy is it to service and get replacement parts for? It's an important question. I don't know anything about servicing mid-drive motors. I did, however, ask Hyper what they did as far as parts. They told me they had some metric that so many parts versus whatever bike that they stock, and that they'd really stocked up on all of the parts for this bike. So I don't have any worries with any issues of getting for the life of whatever this model is going to be for a useful life for us riders. Being able to have parts available. Don't have any concerns with that based on my previous experience with Hyper, which has been pretty good. Flash 5, $14.98 is the price. Does it make you feel like you're not on a Walmart bike? That kind of goes back to a question I answered earlier about the geometry. And does it feel modern? No, this doesn't feel like what I believe you are envisioning as a Walmart bike, the old 70-degree head tube angle and rubbing your foot on the front tire when you turn. None of that with this bike. Jared the Good. How are the bearings? We've already talked about that, so I'll skip over that. And how does it compare to the previous Hyper electric bikes? Really, not even comparable. The only thing that's comparable is the fact that the battery is the same form factor and fits down in there. Of course, this one's got a little bit extra juice in it, but I still use my other e-ride bike batteries. Well, the only spare one that I have. I use that e-ride bike battery on this, so the battery's cross-platform compatible. Benji22, what's the actual not advertised peak or max amps? I don't have an answer for that. I really don't. You can look at vinca.jp, kind of look up, and I think this is the E20 or a variation of the E20, so maybe some of that applies. I don't know. All I know is, unfortunately, that's the one thing I can't provide you. TC, so far the best reason for a mountain bike. Let's see if I can get down to the actual question. What's the runtime on moderately steep / difficult trails going up? How steep can it go? What's the percentage of grade it can handle? I can't answer that. I haven't measured grades, and I never time myself going uphill because I don't want to be embarrassed. But I can tell you that I can make it from the start of Wildwood to the top of Wildwood, actually to the very back of the trail, and not only not feel completely beat and need a break when I get there, but I can also do so in record time. I even have one of the walkers. There's a morning walker that always sees me riding the trail. And I was talking to someone else at the end of the trail, and he happened to walk back by. And he said, "Oh, you have an e-bike today. I wondered how you were going up the hill so fast." So TC, I hope that answers your question, because I don't know actual percentage of grades, but I will. Let me throw one other thing in here for you. I will tell you, the only time I've hit a limit on this motor, was I came down a hill and I was coming back up another one, and I don't know what happened. I stopped, probably traction or something. I stopped and I was wedged up against a root, and I had it in the highest gear, and I went to try to assist take off with it without downshifting, and I could feel the motor shudder. It clearly was at its limit, but I still did hop over that root and up the hill, but it was at its limit on that. So maybe that helps you in some way. Simrig PC 27 bits, one of my regular live stream viewers. Would you guys like to see an upcoming live stream? Because I've been thinking maybe about the end of January, beginning of February, doing one. It looks very similar to the Hydroform in some aspects. Yes, it does. Does it share the same feel as the Hydro, like seating position and all that? Not really. I'll be honest. My modified Hyper Hydroform is so modified that it's not even going to feel like the original Hydroform, but this definitely does not feel like the original Hydroform, the wider bars and so on. It feels totally different. The slacker head tube, it is a very different riding bike than the Hyper Hydroform, and I would arguably say a lot better, at least in my opinion. Dallin Lake. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly. Oh boy, you have a lot of questions here. Covered that in the video. I've covered that. I'm going to let you do your own work here. I apologize, but to get through this, what's the brake mount rotor minimum? Well, the minimum, at least for factory, is 160 millimeter because that's what it's set up as. What's the headset size? I mentioned that earlier in this video. Shock size. The factory shock, pull this camera up for you. The factory shock eye to eye is 165 millimeters, and I measured this along with just what I know about 165 shocks, and it's 165 by 38. I'm not going to answer these two because they're answered in this video, but number 7, you also asked, can you put a larger shock on this? A lot of people ask that on various bikes. Technically, yes, I could probably put a 190 on this, but what that does is kicks this up so high that it changes all the back end geometry. I don't recommend doing that. You need to stick with how this is engineered to work and use that. And if you want to start re-engineering this mount on your own, and you know, that's up to you, but I would say no. Down here, I would say no. Let's now go to Man Ray, who asked, does the build quality inspire confidence? I can only give you my opinion, and for where I ride this, I don't have any problems. So I hope that answers pretty much everything that you wanted to know about this bike. Now it's time for me to modify it, see if I can make it even better. If you have any other questions, be sure to ask them down in the comments, or any opinions, especially about that boost up front. I really want to know. And of course the rear spacing, now that we know that's wider than this technical drawing tells us that it is. So curious, many things to be curious about here on the Hyper E-Ride Mid-Drive Mountain. Thank you for watching KevCentral. Have a great day.